There's a supply side revolution going on all over the world that few people are really aware of. I say supply side because these are tax cuts, these are deregulatory efforts that are taking place currently on 4 continents. We already know Asia's in pretty good shape. They've got limited governments, and that's why they're growing so aggressively in Asia, all over Asia, including Vietnam. They've got a really good policy mix. Well, add to that now India. India is now rationalizing their tax scheme, which was so complex, it was very difficult to produce some sort of a product in the interior and get it out to the coast to put it on a ship and transport it, because you had to go through like 15 different tax regimes and pay your taxes in cash at the border, which is rife with, of course, fraud. But they've done one national tax, like a value-added tax, to supplant all these little individual tax rates that you had to pay as an exporter. Are you with me? That is very pro-growth, because they've taken all the friction of all that fraud out of the economy. I'm very bullish on India. I don't understand it quite. I've got to do a little more work, but it's very interesting, and that is a very necessary move for that country to grow. So now there's South America. We all know South America's had a very difficult past. They've had these socialist dictators, like, of course, in Venezuela, or like the Peronists in Argentina. They've really suffered for decades and decades and decades from bad government. Yet, the continent of South America is rich with resources. Not only is it arable land, they've got about 10 Iowas in Argentina by itself. They've got gold and silver and zinc and copper and oil in abundance. And all those natural resources have been held dormant by policies initiated by these governments that have disincentivized production. Argentina was once the 4th richest country in the world in the late 1800s. Number 4. By the way, it's nowhere near that now. It's a very poor country. That's because they went through 6 successive armed coups, military dictators. They taxed the last man standing. They taxed production to where it stopped. Halted. Now they've got this reformer by the name of Mauricio Macri. Anybody read about this guy? He is something else. He wins by like a hair against another socialist dictator, who, by the way, now might go to jail. I mean, either you get elected down there or you go to jail. That's kind of like the binary deal if you're a leader. It's something we don't recognize. I mean, we think our leaders are sketchy, right? I do. But it's nothing like down there. I mean, this guy Lula da Silva out of Brazil, he just was jailed. He was the prior, he was the president just 2 terms ago. And now he's in jail for graft. Anyway, Argentina. It's like the Garden of Eden. And yet it's been penalized by bad government. This guy, Mauricio Macri, wins by just a slight margin. He's cut 30% export tariffs. The prior regime had imposed 30% export tariffs on everything they make. It's a poor country. They consume nothing. They export everything. So basically, she taxed everything right there. So this is a great story about the supply side of policy and a behavioral change that is worth noting. So he runs for office, and on the campaign trail, he promises farmers and producers, I'm going to cut export tariffs to 0 if I'm elected. So let's assume you all are a bunch of farmers in South America, in Argentina. What do? It's a very resource-rich country. They produce a lot of corn, soybeans, wheat, hay, beef. What do? Well, here's what they did. While he was running for office, they quit selling their corn on the international markets. They hoarded it. They put it in silos and waited for the election. He wins. His first act is to cut 30% export tariffs to 0. You know what they did? 13 million tons of Argentine corn hit global markets within about 3 weeks, and it drove corn futures prices to 10-year lows. Now there's a policy and a behavioral change and a price change, and I run a hedge fund and I invest where policy meets price. All I got to do is figure out, what are you people going to do when a policy is aimed at you or pulls back from you? How would I do it? That doesn't require a PhD. All it requires is have a couple of kids. You'll know exactly around the dinner table how they respond to incentives, and that's how producers respond, predictably. Are you with me? So it's really not that hard to understand how a policy meets a price through the conduit of behavior of the supply side, producers, back to that. So, Argentina. Farmers planted 40% more corn acreage in the last minutes of the growing season after this guy was elected. It was late in the planting season, excuse me. They only had a week left, and yet with that week, they planted 40% more corn acreage. They had a very good growing season. The harvest was 35% higher than the year before. Go out another year, because he was elected December 2015, they've had a 75% increase in corn production in 2 years. Same land, same rain, same earth, change in incentives. So I'm very bullish on Argentina. And by the way, it's not just Argentina. Chile just elected a man by the name of Sebastian Pinera. Sebastian Pinera is a supply-side reformer. He's looking to cut tax rates. He's looking to, for instance, sell off the state-owned copper company. They produce tons of copper in Chile. It's their biggest, 60% of their economy is copper. And the government owns the largest copper producer. He's about to do an IPO of it. Let me tell you, that is accretive to growth. Because no longer will this company be run by a bunch of insiders in the government, where the chief incentive is just to get more. It's going to have now the discipline of the free market applied to this company. When they float those shares, the pressure grows, and if the CEO makes a mistake, the stock goes down, they respond. It's very, very accretive to growth. Are you with me on that? By the way, Brazil, with all their political turmoil, like I said, Lula da Silva is now in jail. President Temer, who was taken over by default when the other guy went to jail, is not popular, but he's doing what's necessary. They have a very bad budget, they have very high pensions problem, and he's starting to reform that, and he's actually taking they own 72, the government owns 72 industrial companies in Brazil, and they're starting to privatize them. They're going to privatize, remember Petrobras? They're going to privatize Electrobras, which is their giant power company. They're getting ready to float shares and apply the disciplines of the free market on a big behemoth, and let me tell you something, it's very accretive to growth. So here we have in South America, Peru's stable, we got Chile with Pinera, we've got Argentina with Mauricio Macri, we got Brazil in flux politically, but they're doing the right things. And so here we have this continent that's been dormant with so much potential, a large population of educated people, and it might come alive.
I've been speaking, I'm a guest lecturer at Vanderbilt, where I can take these little minds of mush and sharpen them up, and I speak at other schools and so forth, and I told this story because it turns out the economics professor that asked me to speak to his lab was an atheist. He told me that, and so I said, look, I know this atheist economics professor, just like you. One day he was walking through the Appalachians by himself on a beautiful, crisp Saturday afternoon. It was a gorgeous day. And of course, like a professor, he was completely lost in his thoughts, thinking about evolution, the power of nature, just lost. And he hears a rustling in the woods next to him. He looks over, and a big black bear comes out of the woods and starts chasing him down the path. Of course, he runs like a professor does, like this. And he can't run, he's not neat, he's got pins and calculators falling out, the bear's catching him, he looks over his shoulder, the bear's catching him, he's running as fast as he can, he trips on a stump, falls to the ground, scuttles over on his back to see the bear, claws fully extended, about to take his head off. And the atheist professor from Vanderbilt yelled, "Oh my God!" Right then time stopped and the bear froze. And a voice came from the heavens. "Ha ha ha ha! You've forsaken me all these years. You've told students, thousands of them, that I don't exist, and you want me to help you now." The professor was up the creek. He's like, "Well, sir, I guess it'd be a little insincere, to ask you to turn me into a God-fearing Christian now, but could you turn the bear into a Christian?" God said, "Very well." The bear reanimated, put his paws together, and said, "Bless this food I'm about to receive."
You know that we have 150 billion barrels of oil on federal territory that has been taken off limits to producers by subsequent presidents, from Bush Sr. to Bush Jr. to Clinton to Obama. Remember, the Bushes imposed moratoriums on drilling for oil where it's cheap and plentiful on federal lands in Alaska, shallow waters. Now this gets, a lot of people say, "Yeah, but the environment," and I'll tell you this, it's been worse for the environment. Taking those easy to reach resources, oil resources, off the market has been worse for the environment because it's chased companies like BP to ultra deep water. Where the BP Horizon spill happened, in whatever it was, 6,000 feet of water, then another 5,000 feet of the Earth's crust. Let me tell you, that's risky. And it's costly, but it's environmentally risky. They're not out there for their health, see if they can do it. They're out there because there's still a strong demand for oil, And our government took all these easy-to-reach resources on land, by the way, in many cases, off limits. So it's chased them out to the most extreme production areas where you can have an accident like that. And so I feel compelled to tell people, you know, it's a lot deeper than just the surface. If you close off access, if that oil spill had happened, by the way, on land in Alaska, they could have shut it down in 3 hours, not 3 months. Nothing to it. So now Anwar's on the table. And I got to tell you, I'm pro Anwar development because of that. I'm in the position where I have to analyze all these policies like a scientist. I can't get emotionally involved because I'm trying to make money on the distortion. I've got a front row seat to the train wreck that is government policy, and I have to be dispassionate about it. And when I saw what happened at BP, I kind of changed my opinion about oil. And by the way, Alaska used to be the #1 producing state. It's now #9. And it's not because they're running out of hydrocarbons. The federal government put a moratorium on drilling, where it's cheap and plentiful, on land and in shallow water. That's loosening up. I think oil prices are going down. Once this little trade skirmish in the Middle East ends, hopefully soon, I think oil prices are going down like 40, 50 bucks, 40, maybe 30. You with me? Now, would that be good for your businesses? Fantastic is what it would be.
Not for Texas.
What?
Not for Texas.
Not for Texas. Good point. Well, yeah, I guess you're right. Fracking. You know what fracking is? Fracking is an end run around these moratorium against drilling where it's cheap and plentiful with traditional means. What happened was the price hit $144 in 2008. And ingenuity and capital and American grit developed a new way to do this, to get oil out of tight formations, out of shale formations on private land. The one truth about fracking is it's 100% on private lands. Does that tell anybody anything? I'll tell you what it tells. It's ingenuity and capital getting around a moratorium for drilling for oil where it's cheap and plentiful. And that's the beauty of the dynamic world we live in uniquely here in America, is that we can get around these regulations, and we do, but the price had to get to $144 a barrel before we did it. Anyway, so I'm watching these deregulatory efforts around the world in the United States, and it leads me to think that prices are not going to go egregiously high. Because again, Milton Friedman, you've heard of Milton Friedman, he was one of the foremost theorists on inflation, and he always said inflation is too much money chasing too few goods. I know where we got the too much money, $13 trillion in QE. But how do you get too few goods? In a freely functioning economy, 100% freely functioning, you really never end up with too few goods. There's the substitution effect you might have learned about in Economics 101, which is fracking, whereby the price of getting this becomes so expensive, so we create a Lucite one. It's a substitution effect to a traditional means of doing something. That's what fracking is. So in a fully dynamic, freely functioning market, there is no scarcity. And so when you deregulate these markets, when you cut the cost of producing goods and services, you know what you're going to get? More goods and services on 4 continents. And what's that do to prices? Puts a lid on them, and it probably sends them down. So I'm not on board this inflation deal at all. You might see a temporary spike in inflation. I think we're seeing that. As demand crops up and the current existence of supply is kind of overwhelmed, but with a free market, producers are going to be incentivized to produce more to meet the supply, the demand increase, right? And the price increase, and it will equilibrate and bring down prices. Are you with me? I just am not on board the inflation story long term.